Hello and welcome to another Intro to Java Programming video. In this video, I'm going to talk about writing classes and object orientation. This is going to be the first video in our whole OOP unit, or Object-Oriented Programming unit. So classes, what are they? How do they work? I'm going to start by just writing a very simple class. I'm going to make a class that has two variables, and I'm going to give it a constructor. I'm going to give it getter and setter methods and a toString method. And we'll explore how these things work. We'll talk about what they are. So for starters, I'm going to set up the initial state of my class. So I'm going to go private string fname and lname. These are the variables that are going to describe what a person is in my piece of software. We call them instance variables. Now let's make a constructor. A constructor kind of looks like a method, but it's not a method. If we look at a method is going to have in the method header, like if I made a method, it would have these things: the visibility modifier or access modifier, the return type, the identifier, the parameter list, and then the body. Right? We've got some of those things here. We've got the visibility or access modifier, we have the identifier, and we have the parameter list. What we don't have is a return type. Constructors are not methods, even though they look like methods and they kind of behave like methods, sort of a little bit. They are not methods and they don't do the same thing. They can't return anything. Furthermore, a constructor, something that's very important about it, is that the identifier of the constructor has to match the identifier of the class. And if you look at your file system, when you name the file, it has to match as well. So the file name out here for the Java file has to match the class name in the class header, which has to match the identifier on the constructor. If any of those things don't match, you're going to get a compile time error and things just won't compile, it won't work. The constructor, in a lot of ways, works like a method. You use the parameter to bring data into the body of the class. And I'm going to use this constructor to initialize the state of an object. What I mean by that is I'm going to kind of like we've done with methods going way back, we use the parameter variables, the formal parameter, to assign values into the instance variables. Now what I'm going to do with this constructor is I'm going to use it to build objects of type person. Let's see what that looks like using the constructor. I'm going to make another new class, and I'm just going to call it test person. And I'm going to give it a main method. So this class, I'm going to instantiate a person in here and I'm going to use it. Okay, I'm going to start this way. Person, P1 gets new person. And if I end this right here, it's going to have an error. If I hover over this, it's going to say person is essentially what it says is it's missing the parameter arguments. It's saying person with a string and a string in person cannot be applied to empty parameter. Okay, so if we look at the person class, you notice it takes a string and a string. Well, over here, there's nothing in this parameter. If these don't match, I've got a syntax error. So I have to match this. And what I'm going to do is pass a first name and a last name. I'll use my own name. And it's got to take two strings. So I'll pass them in as literals. You can also use variables in constructors just like you can with any method. So the way a constructor functions just like a method does as far as the parameter goes. It's going to take these two literals and it's going to pass them into the actual parameter, and those actual parameter are going to be used to initialize the instance variables. Okay, we've been doing this for a long time with all of the J components that we've been building in all of our GUIs and all of our drawing frames and things like that. But this is what it looks like on the inside. So I've got my person constructor being used right here, and when I make that constructor call, it goes right to this point in the code. It takes the first name Charlie in there and assigns it to the F name, takes the last name Goro there and assigns it to the L name. All right, great. Now we have a living, breathing person object, but we can't really do anything with it yet. The purpose of writing a class is to wrap up a bunch of data along with a bunch of services so that we can work on that data. Perhaps I would do something like this, maybe public string get full name. And what this is going to do is it's going to return the F name plus a space plus the L name. There you go. Now I'm working on that data in the class. I'm going to use the data from these instance variables in this method called getFullName. I'm going to go over and test this so we can see how methods work with objects. All right, so this right here, P1, is a reference variable, and it's pointing to something called an object. An object is basically just a collection of actual values associated with this person class. So right now the P1 object is a representation of the F name variable holding Charlie, the L name variable holding Goro, and then the method getFullName. That's what this object is. It's got the potential to store those data and do some things. What I'm going to do is use that object to print out the full name. And if I pass P1 in here, dot get full name, it's going to get the full name and it's going to return it to this point. It's going to print it out. Let's test this and see how it works. And there you have it. It printed out the full name. Well, what if I wanted to access those, the first and last name, individually instead of as just a full name? I might need some methods to do that. So I'm going to create some methods that are called getters. These are also called accessors. Public string getFname, return fname. This is a getter. Getters are conventional methods. In other words, they're commonly used across all Java programming. And what they're used for is to retrieve or access instance variables. You might notice that I set their visibility to private. That means nothing can access these two variables outside of the body of the class. So test person does not have access to those two variables. If I try to get those two variables, fname, for example, it's going to highlight it red and say fname has private access in person. That means I can't access it. But if I want to get that fname here, I can go get fname. And it's going to retrieve the value held in the fname variable. It's going to return it to me at this point. Then I can do whatever I want with it. That's a getter. Generally, you create getters for every single instance variable in your class. So I'd make another one for last name if I needed to. Now, we might want to mutate or change that value. Like, what if I wanted to change my first name to something much cooler? I would write a setter to do that. By convention, setters are void. In other words, they return nothing. Their name is always going to be set, and then the name of the variable that you're setting, and they're going to take in a type of variable in the parameter that matches the type that you want to modify. So if I want to modify the last name or the first name, it is of type string, so I have to take in a variable of type string. Right? Now, what I'll just do is use a method like I always would. Fname gets n, and there you have it. I've made my setter. Now I could go out here and I could go p1 dot set fname and then give myself a different name. Oops, it's got to be a string. Steve. Is that a cool name? I don't know, maybe. And I'm going to go get full name again, and it shouldn't say Charlie Gorel anymore. It should say Steve Gorel the second time around. So when I print it after that statement, see it says Charlie Gorel, and then it says Steve Gorel. So what I did is I used this setter method here to update the first name. So this is how methods work. Methods work by invoking them on an object. So you've got your variable over here, your reference variable that stores your object. You've got the dot operator, which gives you access to anything that's public inside of that object. In other words, that dot operator is like opening a door to the class so I can get anything and use anything that's public. Okay? All of the methods, any public variables, all that stuff becomes available through this dot. And so what I'm going to do with that dot is I'm going to call one of my methods. I'm going to call the set fname, and I'm going to use it exactly as the method prescribes. We've been writing methods for a long time, so you know that when you have a parameter argument here, when you call the method, you have to match that parameter. If you don't match it, you've got a problem. Okay? So this is an example of a setter and a getter. I'm going to finish out my class here, or at least I'm going to finish out the getters and setters through a nifty little trick in IntelliJ. If you're using IntelliJ, you could do this along with me. If you're using another IDE, most IDEs are going to have a feature similar to this. I know Eclipse does as well. So code, generate, and then we could do getter and setter. And I just need to do getter and setter for lname. So I get lname, set lname. Now I've got get fname and set fname. And then I've got my constructor. Right, so this is fleshing out the interface with this class. When I say the interface with this class, I mean the way that a user is going to interact with the data in that class. Now there's one more conventional method that we use in classes, and it's called the toString method. I'm not going to write it myself. I'm just going to generate it because I'm lazy. So generate toString. And a toString is generally going to return a string representation of the state of an object. So it's going to return, a string concatenated with strings that describe the variables, and then the actual variables concatenated with them themselves. All right. So when I test this, I'm just going to copy this for a second. Bring it down here and paste. Remember, the dot operator gives us access to all the things in the class. And I hit that dot operator, it'll give me a list of all things I can do. So you can see my get full name, get fname, get lname, then I've got toString. I'll see what that does. So I make a call to toString. And there I have it. It's printing out person with fname of Steve, lname of Gorel. So this is a little bit about writing a class and instantiating an object of that class and using the methods on that object. I'm going to make one more video using these two classes before I go into the other examples that I've made. And I want to talk a little bit more about the object-oriented portion of this. Thanks for watching.